Clara stood at the edge of her small apartment, her backpack slung over one shoulder, feeling a strange mix of relief and nervousness. She had been planning this hike for weeks, quiet mornings, fresh air, no one demanding her attention. The city had worn her down. Her marriage, once full of warmth, now felt cold and distant. The men in her life, her husband and his close friends, seemed to only see her as someone to be managed, ignored, or dismissed. Clara didn't want to feel invisible anymore. She needed to find herself again, even if it meant walking alone into the unknown. The early morning air was crisp as she stepped onto the trailhead leading to the Appalachian woods. Trees towered above, casting long shadows that shifted with the rising sun. Clara's boots crunched softly on the gravel path, each step carrying her farther from the noise and tension she'd left behind. The sounds of the city car horns, shouting voices. The buzz of electronics faded quickly, replaced by birdsong and the gentle rustling of leaves. It was the kind of silence that felt rare and precious, like a breath she had been holding for too long. With every mile she walked, Clara felt the weight on her chest lighten just a little. The pain of neglect and misunderstanding still lingered, but here, surrounded by nature, it seemed manageable. She thought about her husband, about the cold dinners and the quiet evenings filled with separate screens and separate worlds. It wasn't just about loneliness, it was about feeling unseen. She wondered when their marriage had started to unravel. When conversations became sharp or silent, and when the love they once shared became just a memory. Her mind drifted to the men she had hoped to escape her husband's friends, who had always made her feel uncomfortable. Even if nothing had ever been said aloud, she had hoped the hike would be a place far from their judgments and their whispers. She wanted to clear her head to find the strength she needed to face what was next. She told herself this was just a walk, just a moment of peace. The trail curved gently upward, and Clara's legs burned with the effort, but she welcomed the physical challenge. It distracted her from the thoughts that threatened to overwhelm her. The forest felt like a different world, timeless, unchanging, honest. She breathed in the pine scent, letting it fill her lungs, washing away the heaviness of weeks and months. As she moved deeper into the woods, she noticed the sunlight filtering through the canopy, casting golden spots on the ground. The peace was almost too perfect, too fragile. Clara thought she was alone, truly alone for the first time in years. But she didn't realize she was being watched. From a ridge not far away, two men stood quietly, their eyes fixed on the woman below. They didn't speak at first, just observed. They were part of the same world Clara had left behind, the same circle of friends who had grown too close to her husband. The same men whose presence had always unsettled her. They hadn't expected to see her here, out in the wilderness, where they thought she would never come. But now that she was, they were unsure what to do. Clara's pace slowed, a strange feeling creeping over her like a shadow on a sunny day. She glanced up toward the ridge but saw nothing. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that maybe, just maybe, the escape she wanted wasn't as complete as she hoped. Were they really here? Had they followed her? Why? She tried to shake off the thought and pressed on. Her legs ached, her breath came in steady bursts. But she kept moving, telling herself that this hike was hers alone. The trees closed in around her, the sounds of the forest wrapping her in a quiet cocoon. But the idea that someone might be watching made her feel exposed in a way the city never had. Clara's mind wandered to the reasons she had left, how the small betrayals and quiet silences had built a wall between her and the man she once loved. It wasn't about wild fights or big arguments. It was about the slow erosion of trust, the way affection dried up over time, leaving only a fragile shell. She remembered moments when she had reached out, only to be met with indifference or distraction. She remembered nights when she cried silently, hoping someone would notice, hoping someone would care. Now, here in the woods, Clara wanted to reclaim her own story. She wanted to find a way back to herself, to the woman who loved hiking and laughing and dreaming. But the presence of those men, whether real or imagined, reminded her that the past wasn't so easy to leave behind. As the trail dipped down near a small stream, Clara stopped to drink and rest. The water was cold and clear, refreshing her more than she expected. She closed her eyes, trying to hold on to the moment, the peace, the solitude. She told herself she could do this, that she was stronger than the silence she had lived in. But as she opened her eyes and looked back up the path, she caught a movement just beyond the trees. Her breath caught in her throat. The men were there, not hidden, but watching. Clara's escape had been found. She didn't know why they were there, whether it was coincidence, concern, or something else entirely. But the feeling of being watched made her heart ache in a new way, mixing fear with a strange sense of connection. They were part of her story now, whether she liked it or not. Clara took a deep breath and kept walking. The hike was no longer just a way to escape. It was a journey toward understanding, toward facing the complicated truths she had been avoiding. The forest held no easy answers, but it held space for her pain and hope, her heartbreak and strength. And as the sun climbed higher, Clara felt for the first time in a long time that maybe she could find her way again, not by running away, but by confronting what had followed her into the woods and what might follow her beyond them. Clara kept moving along the narrow trail, her breath steady but her mind racing. The forest around her seemed to close in tighter, the trees standing tall and silent as if they were witnesses to something she hadn't yet understood. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, that she wasn't as alone as she had hoped. She glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing but the thick underbrush and dappled sunlight. Still, her heart raced with a mixture of emotions, confusion, sadness, and something sharper, like the sting of betrayal. The men she had hoped to escape, her husband's friends, were somehow here, in this place she thought would be hers alone. Clara's mind spun with questions. Why were they here? Had they followed her? Or was this some strange coincidence? Her footsteps quickened. The trail twisted and rose, leading her toward a rocky overlook where the forest stretched endlessly in every direction. She wanted to put distance between herself and the feeling of being watched. Yet, no matter how fast she moved, the shadow lingered. Suddenly, she heard voices not loud, but close enough to catch her attention. She froze. Two men appeared at the edge of the path ahead, their figures framed by the golden light filtering through the trees. Clara recognized them instantly, Mark and Ryan, two of her husband's closest friends. She felt a wave of mixed emotions. Relief, because they weren't strangers. Fear, because their presence here was unexpected. And anger, because it felt like an invasion of the space she had sought for herself. Mark stepped forward, his expression open but uncertain. "Clara," he said softly, as if testing the sound of her name. Ryan stood quietly beside him, eyes steady but kind. Neither made a move to block her path. Clara's heart pounded fiercely. She wanted to turn and run, but her feet stayed rooted. "I didn't expect to see you here," Clara said, voice trembling slightly. "Why are you here?" Mark looked down at the ground for a moment before meeting her gaze again. "We wanted to make sure you were okay," he said, honestly. "When we heard you were planning this hike alone, we worried." Clara's mind raced. She had imagined many things about how this trip would go, but concern from these men wasn't one of them. "I needed to get away," she said quietly, "from everything." Ryan nodded slowly. "We understand that. Maybe better than you think." For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, the forest wrapping around them like a shield. Clara felt a strange sense of calm wash over her, despite the tension in the air. These men, who had always been part of the life she wanted to escape, were now sharing this space with her in a way that felt different, more honest, more vulnerable. Mark broke the silence. "Clara, we know things haven't been easy for you, and maybe we haven't always seen what you were going through. But we're here now. If you want to talk, we're willing to listen." Clara's eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. It was painful to hear the truth in his words, to realize how isolated she had felt even when surrounded by people who cared in their own way. She had built walls to protect herself, walls that had only grown higher with time. "I don't know if talking will fix anything," she whispered, "but I can't keep pretending everything is okay." Ryan took a step closer, his voice gentle. You don't have to pretend here. For the first time in months, Clara let herself breathe fully. The forest around them held no judgments, only quiet understanding. She thought about her marriage, about the silence that had grown between her and her husband, about the lonely nights filled with unanswered questions. The presence of Mark and Ryan, once a source of discomfort, now felt like a fragile thread connecting her back to a world she had almost given up on. Maybe this hike wasn't just an escape, it was a chance to face the pain, to begin healing. Clara wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. I don't want to run anymore, she said, voice stronger now. I want to find a way to move forward, even if it's hard. Mark smiled gently. That's brave, Clara. We're here to help if you'll let us. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows through the trees, the three of them continued along the trail together. The forest no longer felt like a place to hide from the world, but a space where truths could be spoken softly, and wounds could begin to heal. Clara's heart was still heavy, but it carried a spark of hope. The men who had once been part of the pain were now part of the path towards something new, a chance at understanding, forgiveness, and maybe even love that could be rebuilt on stronger ground. And as the evening settled over the woods, Clara felt for the first time in a long while that she was not alone. Clara walked slowly, the quiet forest around her feeling different now, less like a refuge and more like a place of reckoning. Mark and Ryan followed close behind, their presence a strange comfort and an unexpected challenge. The sun was lower in the sky and the air was cooler. The path wound between tall trees, the shadows stretching long across the ground. Clara's mind was heavy with thoughts she hadn't dared face before. What had brought her to this moment? What could come next? Mark broke the silence first, his voice calm but steady. Clara, we've all made mistakes. Sometimes we don't see what's happening until it's almost too late. His words hung in the air, gentle but powerful. Clara looked at him, surprised at how honest he seemed. It was true. She had lived with the silence in her marriage for so long, pretending everything was fine because it was easier than facing the truth. Ryan nodded quietly. We never wanted to hurt you, but maybe we didn't notice the distance growing between you and James. James, her husband's name, felt like a weight on her chest. She had loved him once, believed in their future together. Now, the space between them was filled with cold looks and half-hearted conversations. Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can trust anymore. It feels like everything I believed in has fallen apart. Her hands clenched the straps of her backpack. She had hoped this hike would clear her mind, but instead, it was opening old wounds she wasn't sure she could heal. Mark stopped and looked at her with steady eyes. Trust is hard to rebuild, but it's not impossible. It starts with being honest about what hurts. He paused, then added softly, and sometimes forgiveness begins with understanding, even when it's painful. Clara looked away, her throat tight. She thought about the nights spent crying silently, the times she had felt invisible, the growing suspicion that James had drifted away from her heart long before she noticed. The men beside her, once shadows in her life, now seemed like unexpected allies in her pain. Ryan took a step forward. Clara, sometimes people hurt the ones they love because they don't know how else to deal with their own struggles. It doesn't excuse the pain, but it helps to see it. His voice was kind, without judgment. Clara wanted to believe him, but found it hard to let go of the bitterness. The three of them continued walking, the path narrowing as they moved deeper into the woods. Clara's thoughts tumbled like the leaves beneath her feet. She had wanted to run away, to leave the men and the memories behind. But here they were, standing with her in the quiet, sharing a fragile honesty. Mark stopped by a small clearing where wildflowers bloomed in soft colors. He looked at Clara and said, "This isn't just about you or James. It's about all of us. We've been part of your life, and maybe we didn't always do right by you." His voice carried a sincere regret that surprised Clara. She felt a lump rise in her throat. "I never wanted to blame you, but sometimes I felt like I was fighting alone." Tears welled in her eyes, not from anger, but from the release of so much pain held inside. The forest around them felt like a witness to her truth. Ryan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore." His words were quiet but filled with meaning. Clara looked at the two men, seeing in their faces a shared weariness, a hope for something better. The sun dipped lower, casting warm orange light through the trees. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her body ease just a little. This moment, difficult and raw, was also a beginning. She realized she didn't have to carry the pain silently anymore. There was space here for tears, for questions, for healing. Mark smiled softly. "You're stronger than you know, Clara. And this journey, this path you're on, it's about finding your own strength again." His words gave her a flicker of hope. A reason to believe that, maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Clara nodded slowly. "I want to try. To understand, to heal." Her voice was firmer now, carrying a quiet determination she hadn't felt in a long time. The men beside her seemed to understand that this was just the first step, not the end. As twilight settled in, the three of them began walking back toward the main trailhead. The woods, once a place of escape, had become a place of truth. Clara felt the weight of her past, but also the possibility of a future where she could reclaim her life one. On a step at a time, the silence between them was peaceful now, filled not with fear or suspicion, but with a shared hope. Clara knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be hard conversations, painful memories, and uncertain days. But for the first time, she wasn't walking it alone. The forest whispered around them as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Clara looked up, feeling a quiet promise in the night air. She was ready to face what had been broken, to find the pieces that could be mended, and to open her heart to the possibility of love and trust again. And in that moment, beneath the vast sky and ancient trees, Clara took her first real breath of freedom. The forest darkened as night fell, but Clara's heart felt lighter than it had in months. The quiet woods around her seemed to hold a kind of magic, a soft promise that things could change. She walked slowly now, with Mark and Ryan beside her, their presence no longer strange or unwelcome, but steady and real. The sun had set, leaving behind a sky sprinkled with stars, and the cool air wrapped around them like a gentle embrace. Clara's mind was full of thoughts, hope, fear, and a strange mix of pain and possibility. She had come here to escape, to run from the men in her life who made her feel unseen and unheard. Instead, she found herself facing them, not as enemies, but as part of a difficult truth she had been avoiding for too long. Mark and Ryan weren't just shadows from her past. They were people who cared in their own way. Imperfect but sincere, as they followed the fading trail toward the trailhead. Clara felt a quiet strength growing inside her. This wasn't the end of her story, it was a new beginning. She had carried so much silence and loneliness. But now she was beginning to speak, to open herself to understanding and forgiveness. The pain was still there, but it no longer held her hostage. Mark glanced at her, a soft smile on his lips. "It's okay to feel lost sometimes," he said, "but you're finding your way back." His words felt like a balm, gentle and true. Clara nodded, grateful for his kindness. Ryan added quietly, "We're all learning. Maybe the hardest part is admitting that we need each other, even when it's complicated." Clara looked at him and saw the honesty in his eyes. She realized that healing wasn't a straight path. It was messy, uncertain, and often slow. The three of them reached a small clearing where the trail ended. Clara paused and looked up at the stars shining brightly above. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of peace. The forest had been her refuge, her place to run. But now, it was a place to stand still and face what came next. She turned to Mark and Ryan. "Thank you for being here, for listening." Her voice was soft but steady. They smiled, understanding the weight of her words. "I hope this is just the start," Mark said. "There's a long road ahead, but you don't have to walk it alone." Clara took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to leave the woods behind. The path back to her life was uncertain, filled with questions she didn't have answers to yet, but she felt ready to face them one step at a time as they walked together toward the parking lot. Clara thought about her marriage, about the love she once believed in and the distance that had grown. She didn't know what the future held, whether she and James could find their way back to each other, or if her journey would lead somewhere new. But for the first time, she felt she had a choice. The night was quiet except for the soft sounds of their footsteps. The stars seemed to shine just a little brighter, as if encouraging her to believe in new beginnings. Clara smiled faintly, feeling a spark of hope in her chest. This hike, meant to be an escape, had become a turning point. She had faced her fears, her heartbreak, and the complicated truth of the people around her. And in doing so, she found a strength she hadn't known she had. The future was still unknown, but Clara knew she would meet it with courage and an open heart. No longer running away, but moving forward, ready to heal, to forgive, and maybe, one day, to love again under the vast, starry sky. Clara took her first step toward a new life, knowing that sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the brightest beginnings.